welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang Desai, and for the first time in 2023, I welcome my friend Simon Bushell. We're right at the cutoff point, Bush, where I cannot wish anyone a Happy New Year some 9 days into 2023, but I'm going to do it because I want to take liberties here and say Happy New Year, sir. Hope your holidays are great. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to the whole Open Air universe as well. And yes, we're back again, Dev. 2023, 14 times, actually 15 times we had to get on the ballot to be host for this show. 14 times we failed. 15th time we made it.
We made some major concessions to the absolute worst people among us to continue doing the show as a result. So get ready for some interesting content in the coming days and weeks ahead. We've been off. We've taken some time off. Of course, we reran one of our favorite episodes last week. But Bush, tennis barely sleeps, and when it does sleep, stuff is still happening. It is clear to us that the off season is by name only, and it's really just a few days to decompress as we get really into the nitty gritty that is the tennis calendar in 2023. And of course, we start in the other side of the world, where everything is on in the middle of the night. It's a really good way to desensitize your brain and really get into some abnormal sleeping patterns as we hit January. I've taken this month for granted, I think, in the past. I think usually it's like, oh God, it's January. We have to start the year again. You got to go back to work. Holidays are over. But this tennis on at the weirdest hours of the day is pretty great. That being said, you're in Europe now. So I wonder for you, has that changed? Is it now just basically like it's almost unwatchable live for you for the most part?
Yeah, GMT is not the greatest for watching sport down under. It makes it slightly challenging to watch anything. So I look forward to the day that I get back to Vancouver and I have that beloved West Coast time zone, which is the best time zone for watching, I think, all sport around the world. I think I'll say that with certainty that I feel that is the case. It's
pretty great. It's pretty good. Only the early start times in the UK when you're out west are tough, but overall, I think I agree with you. That's enough lamenting though about time zones because the sport doesn't stop. And as I said, a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. Let's start with the United Cup, Bush, the newest tournament that a few short weeks ago, I didn't know what it was, who it was, why it was happening. Several more things could be added to that list. But I must say, after observing this tournament in which the United States ended up winning, thoroughly trouncing Italy in the final, I quite enjoyed this. And it does show you the power of teaming up men and women to play in team tournaments, because I thought the vibes overall were quite great, even though the tournament structure didn't make that much sense.
So what are you implying by that? What is the point that you're trying to arrive at? Is that potentially that more team events are good? Is that what you're coming out and saying here? Is that we need to have another 50 team tournaments throughout the whole year?
No, I think just change the ones we do have to make them including everyone. That's all. Like the Labour Cup, for example. We don't need any more. I think this is the max, and maybe as the replacement for the Hopman Cup, I can let this pass as another, oh God, it's another cup competition. But listening to Taylor Fritz talk and listening to Taylor Fritz acknowledge that the USA with the women are just way different in an actual force warmed my heart, because it's true. It's like, yeah, we wouldn't have a chance without the girls on our team. And I'm like, yeah, that is damn true. And it showed out on the court as well. I mean, Jess Pegula reducing Iga Swiatek to tears. I don't know if anyone saw that coming.
I have a theory about this. Well, so let's say this for starters. That was an incredible match to see the level that Pegula managed to find in, and I think she won on her own merits. Yeah, I mean, you could say that Swiatek was off and all those sort of things, and I think we can come on to that in a second, but I just wanted to pitch you an idea just before we start on this.
Please, yes.
If we're going to go men and women playing together for a team competition, let's just go the whole hog. Men, women, doubles, mixed doubles, wheelchair, quad, juniors.
Yes.
Let's do it all in the same bag, same tournament, and let's see who comes out the winner on it. I know it's going to take like 50 years to complete that as a tournament, but I'm so down for it. It would be so fun.
I got Gerard Piqué's number, so I'll send that to you offline and you text him this because I'm down. No, I'm down. And I mean, logistically, I think this is the issue, or not the issue, but this is the thing you have to figure out when you do start things like this. And the idea of having the United Cup take place in like 80 different places, and you had so many damn matches in the preliminary rounds. Like, I don't think you really needed that many. But if this is going to serve as truly what it should be, maybe as a warm-up tournament and for people to get reps, it makes a lot of sense. And we've seen some really bizarre iterations of these competitions in the past. I think our dearly departed ATP Cup, which we loved so much, Bush, had significant flaws as well. But combining the two and just having it so that you're watching a Greece team in which Stefanos Tsitsipas could have got to world number one if his team had helped him, or if he was able to ride the Greece waves. Like, that to me is kind of cool. Or watching Hubie Hurkacz and Iga Swiatek hold court as the vanguards of Polish tennis together. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of convinced, actually. I really enjoyed this as an event, and overall we got some pretty good matches in it. And I think there's a couple of points to take out of it. Obviously, that Swiatek match, and we can touch on it now, I think is one of the main takeaways from the whole event, is just how dominant Swiatek looked in some capacity and then ran into just the performance maybe of a life from Jess Pegula. And also that coupled with the fact that Taylor Fritz looked really good as well. And I think he's rounded into form to the point where I'm very, very curious to see what kind of Australian Open he has. And I think like that's probably the headline of the whole tournament, which is the US and two players in the United States actually looking really good nick. And I'm very, very curious to see what happens at the Australian Open with regards to those two players.
I mean, every single one of those players on Team USA, I could see them getting drawn in a certain place at the Aussie Open and be like, yeah, they could make a run, whether it be Pegula and Fritz, like you mentioned, or even Francis Tiafoe, who was great, and Madison Keys, who was lights out as well. So I totally back that. Bush, I don't know did you see that Maria Sakkari and Martina Trevisan?
I did. Ice skate.
Banter, I guess you could call it at the end, that handshake. What were your thoughts on that?
It was cold, wasn't it?
It was very cold. It was very cold.
Also, in the change of ends, Maria Sakkari yelling at her coach as well, which was quite entertaining. Yelling, should we describe it as yelling? Certainly.
Yeah, I think
a heated conversation.
Heated conversation, exactly. Yes. Our favorite axiom. And again, I think the team aspect brings out another side of the players that I think you are able to see maybe perhaps throughout the year, but it is a different look. And like I said, listening to Taylor Fritz talk about his teammates and listening to Francis Tiafoe talk about his teammates as well, and the way he described Jess Pegula bodying Iga Swiatek made me smile as well. It was great. So yeah, United Cup, you sold us, didn't take much. We are marks, after all, as we've long confirmed on this show. We'll like pretty much anything as long as Gerard Piqué isn't involved. That being said, Gerard, Bush will text you after the show about his League of Nations type idea that'll take at least 3 years to complete.
In the middle of his Twitch football stream. Wait a minute. Hang on a second. Masked tennis. I think we can do that, right? If we just played an event where every single player was masked, could we figure out who they were by their serve and ground stroke routine?
That's actually kind of fun.
Let's do it.
That's actually, yeah.
Come on, people, make it happen.
Fantastic. Anything else about the United Cup before we get into the tour stuff?
This event started on December the 29th.
I'm telling you, it lasted days and days. It was an absolute mission to get through this. I was going through the match history, and I'm like, some of this stuff happened
literally last year.
So last year.
Literally last year. In the previous season, this competition started and ended this season.
Like I said, though, a lot of players involved, and it leads to, I put out a call for some bold takes from our listeners on Twitter through these first 2 weeks, and we got some claims or some comments about some players involved in this tournament, so we'll touch on that a bit later. But let's get to the tour stuff. Bush, big beginnings for two people that I think we expect to be in the conversation in the biggest tournaments throughout this season. On the women's side, we'll begin in Adelaide. Aryna Sabalenka beating one of the Czechia hotshots, did 6,000 of them that are now lurking around every draw, waiting to take you out with the seconds notice, but Sabalenka full value beating Linda Noskova 6-3, 7-6, 7-4 in the tiebreak. You know, Bush, the Sabalenka, the theory goes, if the serve is ever figured out well enough where it's not a liability in big moments, look out. And this was a good sign if you wanted to look at that in that exact area.
So I think this is going to be the year, right? I think this is the one that we circle on the calendar and think that she has good form. She looked good at the end of last year. It looked like she'd figured a bunch of stuff out. She's well and truly entrenched inside of the world's top 5. I think it's not now or never, because I don't believe that's the case. But I do think when you're looking and you're sort of writing down your tier list, if we want to go in that direction of saying which group of players is in the inner circle at contending at every single Grand Slam, she's in tier 2. I think that's fair to say on the women's side. If tier 1 is Iga Swiatek and maybe
Ons
Jabeur and maybe Pegula, maybe Goff, you say that's maybe the tier 1 going into the Australian Open?
Yeah. Hear me out. I'd put her in that first tier. Because I do understand that we did a whole episode about Iga being dominant and unbeatable. I do feel like there are 4 or 5 players that can win this tournament, Bush. And I would open it up to being maybe that first tier. And I include Sabalenka in there for sure. Not just off what we saw in Adelaide this week, but at the end of last season as well. She was quite damn good, Simon. And I know it's tough to learn or really digest, like how well can she carry that over? But in terms of displaying the consistency from a few weeks off to what we saw here, that's a great sign.
It is, and she looked really good as well. It's not like she just won this tournament on the basis that she didn't play anyone. Like, the quality of players that she played against were very, very respectable. And like you mentioned, she doesn't quite live or die by the serve because she's a very complete player, but I thought she served excellently throughout the whole week. I thought she looked very, very solid. And I think that stands her in really, really good stead going in the first Grand Slam of the year. I don't know, man. Like, I agree with you to a certain extent. I think I would not quite put her in that top tier of players going into Grand Slam, just simply because prove it at this point, right? Like, she's 24 years old and I don't really trust her in big matches. I think that WTA final was the first time that I actually really felt convinced that this woman was going to win a Grand Slam. But seeing that and really looking at the performance at Adelaide this week, she's got every chance. She really does. And I'd be really excited to see it.
Yeah, and I probably am taking way too much from that Pegula Swiatek match, in which, as Josh rightfully points out on our Discord, bit of a weird match. Like, I don't think Jess Pegula was playing as if she could not be beaten by anyone, if that makes sense, Bush. I think she was probably beatable on that day by someone on a high level, but that simply wasn't Iga. But that's kind of where you need to be to compete with someone like Swiatek, and while Pegula is in that conversation, I will put Sabalenka in there as well.
It felt like 2021 Swiatek, didn't it? I don't know.
Exactly. No, that's a great point.
We did our retrospective, and she did throw in a few clunkers like that during the 2021 season, where you were like, is she actually going to be a top 5 player? Is that what's going to happen? Given that she just lost 1-4 to someone.
At the beginning of the year too, which is still weird. Like, it's not a normal time and you're in this team competition. It's not a normal match. We'll see what happens on the
Can I ask you a question,
Yeah.
Dev?
Please.
Just before we transition for the rest of this segment as we get into some other tournaments. How much stock do you take from everything that's happened going into the Australian Open? Like, in general, I think we put more stock into some of the clay court stuff going into the French Open. And
yes, yeah,
maybe not the grass court season because that's ridiculous. But certainly the hard court season going into the US Open, I think, gives us a pretty good idea of who's playing at what level. Does any of this matter going into the Australian Open, or is it glorified warm-up events?
Ooh, it's a good question. I mean, I was looking back to what happened last year before the Australian Open, and Rafa Nadal won that Melbourne Somerset. Remember when they had those weird names? And I was like,
that's right.
Interesting, cool. And he beat Max Cressy in a horrendously long first set, and I'm like, okay, yeah, tuck that away. Bit of a sign that you could say, you could see him putting it together when it counted down the road. And Ash Barty, Bush looked really good last year at the beginning, if you remember, right? In that Adelaide, that first tournament, where she beat some very good players along the way to stopping Rybakina in the final. So on the men's side, I don't put anything into anything because I really think that the Novak winning thing is so nailed on, and we'll get to him in a bit, that I can see a lot of guys having nice runs and playing well to start the year, but I have a really hard time not seeing Novak win this tournament. But someone like Seb Korda, to me, has raised their stock. On the women's side, I do think it does matter, is what I'm saying. I think Novak is an outlier, but I think for the most part, if I was a betting man, I'd really like the chances of a Sabalenka in Australia, in Melbourne, and I'd also like the chances a lot of the person we'll talk about next, Coco Gauff, who won her first hardcourt final since 2019, was in her first hardcourt final since 2019, which made me do a double take Bush. That seemed like a long time coming, but I think this is important that the field, you can say what you want about the field, but it was not super lit, as the kids say, and everyone who was top ranked kind of fell early and fell weirdly, including Sloane Stephens and Leylah Fernandez. But you got to play the people in front of you, and we talk about good vibes and feeling good on the court. I think that's very key for Coco being in the right headspace, heading into some high pressure moments that are going to come soon.
Can I give you another stat here?
Please.
Not just first hardcourt final since 2019. It is the first time that she had won a hardcourt event since she was 15 years of age.
What? We make that sound like, how old is she now, though? She's like 18?
She's 18. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So, it doesn't mean too much, but anyway, it sounds funnier that way.
It's still, yeah, it made me gasp. So the desired effect was achieved. No, that's wild. And I mean, I'm not gonna pretend like Rebecca Masarova or Daga Kovacic are going to be the hardest people she's going to play or the toughest people she's going to play down the road, but great signs. And she beat the people she was supposed to beat, including a wild Sophia Kenin in the field. Like, I tried to call it like a Pokemon kind of, but a wild Sophia Kenin appeared, but she beat her as well. So that's good. Simon, what else can you ask? Also chill before the Australian Open. I saw Sakib on Twitter, who's awesome, who has his own podcast as well, but friend of the show, talking about how Seb Korda should take a break after this tournament. They should all take breaks. They should all chill, shouldn't they, before the Australian Open?
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to make a point about Gauff here, and it's something that we can check in with our listeners. Am I just seeing things, or does she look bigger and stronger already? Mm-hmm. She's clearly worked in the off season, because there are some major guns on Coco Gauff now. She is a chiseled athlete at this point, and she really, I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing things, but she definitely looks like she's put in a lot of work, and I think that stands her in really good stead to try and stand the grind of this coming season, especially when she's only 18, right? Like, and I know women's bodies mature more quickly and they reach peak physical condition before the men. I think that's universally true. Someone will tell me off, not the case, because I'm straying into territory that I don't fully understand and fully recognize that. But she looks really good, and I'm stoked to see what she gets up to there. And not just that, we will have some predictions about Coco Gauff in our second segment, which is a spoiler, or a teaser, sorry, I should say.
Gains, as the kids say.
Gains, absolutely.
She's made gains. I've done a lot of as the kids say, because I felt old as hell this week. I'm getting this parting shot, Simon. But yeah, the wash lexicon, it's coming out. I mentioned Sakib, of course, Accent Tennis with an Accent, excellent podcast. But he was watching the Korda match, the Korda Novak final, as was I this morning. Perhaps we'll get to that after the break, Bush, and then we'll get into our bold predictions. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All right. When we come back, we'll touch on the ATP, what happened in Adelaide with the men, Novak hoovering up another title, plus we lay out some bold predictions for the upcoming season with some help from our listeners on Twitter as well, coming up next. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. Talked about the women. Let's talk about the men. Ho hum, another year. But Novak Djokovic is back in Australia where he simply does not lose. Of course, there's some other stuff that went on with him last year, and that's why he wasn't there. But if you want to memory hole that and pretend that didn't happen, like a large segment of society has. Let's remember, like most of Australia has. Let's remember, Simon, that this guy is a freak, but he's especially freaky in Australia. And it takes a lot to beat him, and yet Sebastian Korda was quite close. He was close enough that you had the classic Novak. When things are going badly with Novak, there's some things that he does that you're like, what? And that included sending one of his coaches away when he lost that first set at the end of the tiebreak. I don't know if you caught that, but I found that I chuckled to myself as his coach, probably like, that wasn't my fault, Novak. That was your fault. You're the one playing on the court. But it wasn't easy is what I'm saying. And Seb Korda pushed him to the limit. That being said, adding to the crazy stats, for the 8th time, Novak has won a title after saving a match point, which is just otherworldly. I've had this conversation with you a lot, Simon, I feel like, doing the show, where we enter a tournament on the men's side and we're like, well, what are the chances Rafa loses at the French Open? Or what are the chances Novak loses at the Australian Open? Or what like once in a lifetime event has to happen for them to not win these tournaments? But it does feel like we're in that territory when it comes to Novak in Australia. Not only because he's looking very good, but also because Carlos Alcaraz won't be there either.
Yeah. And I think one of the main contenders to that title in Danny Medvedev, last year's finalist, he got dismantled.
Terrible. Looked terrible too. And he was doing like the kind of mock Novak for having an injury as well, which while I was amused for a few seconds, I also thought to myself, if he's hurt, then why aren't you beating him? Or if he's like, what's going on? It's on your side of the net. It's on your racket as well, Daniel. Like, grow
also,
up
like,
here.
The dude has been faking injuries his entire career. Like,
yeah, none of this is new. No,
look at the tape, for goodness sake. Don't get rattled by someone doing something they've always done. Like, it's not something you need to... I always found Shapovalov getting angry at Rafael Nadal last year during that match. It's like, come on, he's been doing it his entire career, dude. Like, get over it. It's
you literally watched this on TV yourself. Like, you know what's happened. This isn't your first rodeo.
When you're in your Spider-Man pajamas watching him on TV, he was doing this stuff. Anyway, yes. Novak Djokovic, unvaccinated, living his best life. He's back where he knows the country, the surface, the tournaments extremely well. 61 victories, right? 61, his last 61 in Australia and the UK combined. He's pretty much unstoppable in those two countries. Don't let him anywhere near a tennis court in those two places because he will win tournaments and will win matches. The question is anyone going to challenge him at this tournament? I don't think they are. And I think the only contender to that possibly was Carlos Alcaraz. And now Charlie's dead. So what do we do?
Charlie isn't actually dead, but if you missed the news, he is out with a knee injury. I'm going to try and say it as semimembranosus muscle in his right leg. So yeah, he's gone. He'll be back soon, hopefully. Yeah. There's certain words when I say them, I feel so uneducated, and any sort of paleontology word, which again, I tried to say paleontology and just bottled that as well. I'm ashamed, Simon. Anyways,
the answer is no. Pharmaceutical drugs. Anytime you're trying pronouncing that, it's just, I should have stayed in school longer. Sorry, keep going.
The answer is no to your question. Can anyone challenge? Again, it'll take some sort of freak event that has little to do with tennis. An illness, an injury, something like that. I really can't see it. I mean, Rafa's lost 80 matches in a row, it seems, basically at this point, losing. When you lose to Cam Norrie on a hard court, you got to take a big, long look in the mirror. So I'm not feeling it in terms of the field right now. I think this should be pretty comfortable for Novak. And also the fact that he does get into the 4th seed now with Carlitos not in there. That's a big deal as well. Because I think the only other thing for me is like if he runs into like a weird draw where he ends up having to play, I don't know, an informed Kyrgios who cares about something early, or he has to play someone a bit earlier than he should have and he gets surprised. I think his chances of having that happen are a bit less bad in that 4th seed. So yeah, I like his chances a lot. And it's a shame that we won't see Carlitos there one slam after winning the US Open. The consistency and the momentum I don't want to talk about the big guys that much because we talk about them so much, and I understand why we should move forward and talk about everyone else. But the consistency you need to show up and keep showing up and be fit for these tournaments, it's no small thing, Simon. Like, I think it's something that we underrate sometimes. But I wanted to touch on Novak talking about coming from a match point down in the post-match press conference. We have the sound now.
Statistically, I've been lucky to win more of these kind of matches, and of course, the more you win these particular matches, the better you feel. And I think it gets to the head of your opponents more as well. So that's what I want. I want them to know that, regardless of the score line, I'm always there. I'm always fighting to the last shot, and that I'm able to turn things around. So of course, going into the court with anybody, knowing that they know as well what I'm capable of is of course advantage.
So, Bush, you heard Novak talking there about kind of wanting his opponent to know that even if they have a match point, they're a long way from home. And I know it's something that like he's not shy talking about, but I do always really do. I appreciate the insight he gives sometimes about the mindset or the mental approach that he takes in matches, because I do think for all the other stuff going on about him, the mental aspect and the mental strength he shows, it is really quite remarkable. And I don't think you have to be a super big Novak fan to kind of be in awe of that.
To be able to do what he has done throughout his career is extraordinary. And yes, obviously he's a supreme physical athlete, but he's also maybe the best in terms of his ability to focus, his ability to find the game that he needs. I mean, I'd probably put Rafa still there as well. Probably 1 and 2 in that regard, with Federer close third behind them. But even then, like, just the ability to block out the noise, to go back, to find your game. And admittedly, like, his game, I think, relies on a level of not necessarily passivity, and that makes it sound like I'm sliding him, and I don't mean it that way, but his isn't going out and blasting winners. His is finding consistency, finding length, finding angles, making his opponent work. I mean, I'm saying it like it's an easy task. It isn't, but to do that repeatedly on the biggest points and constantly ask your opponent questions, more times than not, statistically, your opponent is not going to answer that question. And that's why he's won so many titles, because he's just really, really good at finding weaknesses as an opponent and constantly, annoyingly poking the finger right where you don't want it to be.
I saw Owen mention this at Tennis Station on Twitter, which must follow if you're a tennis fan. In front of the show, he was talking about Korda finding success beating Novak to the punch on the backhand down the line. And then on match point, it's Novak who decides to go backhand down the line and kind of take over. And throughout a match in which that was not an area of success for him, to decide to go there then at that moment, like that takes a lot of confidence and takes a lot of belief in your ability. And clearly he is not lacking in that, and nailed on as a massive favorite for the Australian Open, and rightfully so. I mean, like Bush said, if it's not the UK or if it's not Wimbledon or Australia, like he's going to be really hard to beat. Should we go on now to our bold predictions?
We should. Just after one point very quickly before we go to the predictions, Sepp Korda should take a lot of positives from this as well. Like, I know an up and down season for him, but he obviously had match point and was extremely close to winning this match. He looked really, really good, not just because of the hair. In general, I thought his game looked like it's come on a lot. And I guess it's kind of a nice segue to say, I mean, he didn't make my bold predictions, but I do think he's a top 20 player by the end of the year. He looks that way to me now.
Yeah. And as Josh said on the Discord, like you can get why people are really high on him from the American side of like who amongst this crop is going to be the best. And often they mention him and you're like, yeah, because you can see glimpses of, okay, like he can hang in these kind of situations against very, very tough players who are better than him at what he does at this point in his career, right? Like he's not at their level in terms of, I'd say, execution and technique, but he's not far away. I'd say there's there's a proximity there that leaves you hopeful for the future in terms of sub-quarter and where you can go from here. But let's get to the bold predictions. Bush, you have a bunch here. I asked for some on Twitter as well, which I mentioned, so I'll try and sprinkle those in as we go along.
Okay, the very first one on my list, I separated them down into on-court predictions and off-court. These are bold, by the way. I'm not saying that I actually truly believe some of these, but...
They're not outlandish, though, you know? They're bold, but they're not like, well, you should get yourself checked out. There's some level here where you're like, yep, I could see it.
Also, just like trying to go fully outlandish makes it a ridiculous segment. So I wanted to ground it at least some level of reality, even though we'll find out if I'm actually true in that correct. Let's start with the first bold prediction. Rafael Nadal retires following his win at the French Open. Seem reasonable?
Okay, well, it seems very reasonable, but my only qualm is that I do think if he wins the French Open, that obsessive tennis brain of his will have a belief that he could probably win another slam, you know? Like, unless he's truly dead by the time he wins the French Open and they have to take him off in a wheelbarrow after the trophy celebration, I think he'll be of the belief that he could at least compete at one of Wimbledon or the US Open. But I do feel like what we've been seeing recently, and when he's losing to players, again, like this, as much as I said to read into what happens early on in the season and how last year Rafa looking good early was a good sign at the Australia Open, I'm not ready to be like, well, losing to De Minaur and Norrie is a sign that he's cooked. I think it is a sign, though, that this is only going to get harder and harder for him. And the grind, or how much he's going to have to grind to win these titles, is going to be... Like, if you thought last year was tough in the Australian Open, like, this is going to seem like a big mountain for him.
He's not looked good in a while. He's not looked good in 5 months, which is quite a long time in the tennis calendar when he's actually playing. And admittedly, he's been injured the entire... Well, even though he's playing these matches, let's be honest, the dude is permanently injured. So I'm very curious. Also, the image that came into my mind of Rafael Nadal looking like Hannibal Lecter being taken off Philip Chatrier court is quite amusing.
It fits, though. It fits.
We'll
get the Photoshop squad on that. Here's one I have from Twitter. We'll start with Karina Mustafa, friend of the show. She's on the show off the back of that thrashing, the United Cup. Karina says Jess Pegula is going to win the Australian Open.
Woof. Coming in hot, coming in bold. That was music to the ears of Devang Desai. Long time Jess Pegula backer, and also go Bills, but not outlandish at all. And again, this is one of those situations where I feel like the draw on the WTA is so important. Like, the draw on the ATP, it's like, sure, it's like you got to slot in where you got to slot in, and Novak being fourth means he'll probably avoid a real disastrous quarterfinal and semifinal even, maybe. But on the WTA, a good draw and a bad draw, the difference between those is so slight. And if you get a bad draw, you end up playing freaking Annette Kontaveit in the third round, and you're like, what did I do to deserve this? But that's how stacked it is, and I fear that could happen to anyone, including Pegula or Goff. But in terms of form and in terms of the way she plays and the way that would adapt to Down Under, and us, as we've already seen from the United Cup, I like Pegula's chances a lot to make a deep run. If this was the fantasy draft, for example, cough, I would be picking Pegula for sure. Well, let's hope that you do not get the first pick in the draft. For the Open Era team perspective, from an Open Era team perspective. So she's a 4-time Slam quarterfinalist. She made 3 quarterfinals last season. It's hard to go from being a quarterfinalist to being a first-time winner.
And I as much as I feel confident about Karina and I's pick, I will say I felt it at the US Open as well. The atmosphere is so much heavier when you get deeper into the tournament. Like, that semifinal day, it's a lot different from the quarterfinals.
I feel like an idiot. It's not really a bold, but I just do not see her as a Grand Slam champion in her career.
Going out on a limb. Wow. Burying Jess Pegula. Pog will be happy. The pro fracking population that listens to the show will not be happy. The golden goose.
Indeed so. Should we get to another bold prediction?
Let's go.
Coco Gauff will win a slam. Not bold, but she'll win a slam in singles and doubles at the same event. The most likely outcome for that is in Paris. I think there's a real chance this happens.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's I know the Williams sisters made it a thing where like ho-hum, or like Martina Hingis did this a bunch as well, where it's like, yeah, you could do both and you're not strained and there's little distraction and you're good enough that you can compartmentalize and focus on each task well enough. I don't know if that's a thing anymore, but I don't know. For every Barb Krejcikova, like, I don't know if, and it's not like Coco hasn't made these runs before, but I think maintaining them at the same time, the weight of it, and it'll depend where it is though as well. Like if this is the US Open, I think just the emotional lift would be so much that I think it'd be a really hard task. But maybe being away, maybe being in Paris gives her enough cover to pull this off. I'd be a fool to bet against her though, so I back it. It'd be an amazing accomplishment for someone who's still 18 years old.
The only problem is if she runs up against Iga Świątek in the final or any stage during the tournament, and I do not back her to win that match. Do you have another one, or shall I go next?
I got another one. This is from Betty, friend of the show, who was asking where we were last week, which was heartwarming, but also we're coming back, Betty, and we're here. But she says, or I'm not sure if it's she, but she says, Alexander Zverev leaves the top 30. I can definitely see this. First of all, I didn't know he was back yet when I was watching. And then I saw Zverev at the bottom. I'm like, oh, I guess it's Misha. Based on the way this guy's playing, it must be Misha as well, because this is horrible. And then it slowly came into focus that no, that was Alexander Zverev. And yes, he's coming back from injury, but whoa, this will be a long road back for him.
I was knee deep in a Reddit thread a few days ago, and I knew it was the moment that I never try and go on there, but I was so curious to see the mood from following some of these tournaments going into the new year. Someone actually legitimately said that Alexander Zverev was the second favorite. This was written down
in Melbourne
on the internet. Anyway.
Amongst his family, you mean? Amongst his family's sons, the second favorite, right? That's what they meant.
Second favorite, unbelievable. Sure, okay, we'll go with that. I
mean, it doesn't really matter because Novak is winning, right? So you could put whoever you want in the second place. It doesn't really matter. But he got smoked by Jiri Lehecka. Jiri Lehecka, who's going to be a player. I like this kid a lot, but smoked by him, smoked by Taylor Fritz. Once again, coming back from the ankle thing, we'll see the long road back, but I wouldn't hate to see it, Betty. I'll tell you that. And also, as noted by John Wertheim and Ben Rothenberg this week, remember that Zverev investigation, Simon, that the ATP said they were doing? Remember what happened to that?
It's coming up. Don't worry. It's in the off the court thread. We probably need to go a bit quicker here. Do you have any others? Okay. Or shall I rattle off some?
I think I have one more from James Gleason, who says Felix Auger-Aliassime wins a slam, which my only problem, James, and I love the shout, is that Novak might do some crazy stuff this year, and I feel like Felix is going to have to slay the beast himself to get a slam at one of these events. He won't be able to get lucky by having someone else take him out. It'll have to be Felix.
I think the only reason that Novak's not going to have a shot at winning the Kalina Slam here is because I don't think he's going to get into the US Open.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I'll rattle off a few here. Speaking of the US Open, how about this for a bold prediction? Naomi Osaka wins the US Open.
On the day she pulls out of the Australian Open, it's a massive claim. But I honestly, I wonder, not impossible. And I think there's been a lot of conversation about where Naomi is at on Twitter as well as our Discord in terms of like what she's going to do, and who knows, she could come back. But I wouldn't put it past her. I do think that this is as fanciful though as my Ash Barty was unretiring this season, Bush. I just want you to know that.
There might be some issues with that as well. We'll come on to that in parting shots. One slight issue with that, but we'll come to it in a second. Just on the court, just to finalize this one, Jannik Sinner makes a Grand Slam final I feel pretty confident about this one.
Yeah.
The level set is there for him to actually have a really good year, and I'm excited to see what he does. And one of the Fruitovas, one of them, because they come as a package deal, will make a slam semi. And I think that is something that we should all keep an eye on. Can I go to the off the court ones? Do you have any of this? Sorry. And we can just quickly go through these and you can tell me which one is the most ridiculous.
I will say that, that new movie, Megan, that horror sci-fi movie with like the doll who's super evil and infiltrates like families and stuff. And there's like a promotional campaign where like there's like 20 of these girls walking around like doing marketing for this. That's how I imagine the next wave of Czech teenagers coming to take over the WTA. So I back that fully.
What is going on in the Czech Republic? How on earth do they complete?
The sporting renaissance. The hockey youths are good. They're going by Czechia now. They dropped the Republic. It's a new day.
I love it, man. I love it. It's great. Okay, off the court. I'll go rapid fire for you. Breakpoint will have more viewers than Drive to Survive. How do you like that one?
Yeah, I could see it. You know what I could also see though? How F1 super fans were really pissed off by the drive-by fans coming in and being like, I love this sport now. And like, this is my favorite thing. I can definitely see this happening to tennis people and tennis heel being so frustrated by what is chosen to be focused on. So I can't wait for that. But yeah, I could see it, Simon.
I love that dichotomy as well. That your traditional hardcore F1 fans is like, wow, no, look at the engine quality. Look at the chassis. Look how aerodynamic that is. And then you have a bunch of people being like, yeah, but he lives on a fucking yacht. Like,
look at that guy. So cool. Look at his sunglasses, dog. Yeah, no, that's true.
An ATP top 20 player will test positive for performance-enhancing drugs. It's been a very, very poor few months in regards to the sport of tennis for players failing drugs tests. We saw another player during the course of this week. It's not looking good, Deb. There's definitely no smoke without fire on this one. There's tons and tons of stuff going, and I really do feel like this one's going to get hit really hard as well at some point on the ATP side.
It's a decent shout. Top 20, though. If you're top 20, I imagine you have enough people around you, Simon, who are mixing those drinks and able to not F up. That I feel like you would take a glaring mistake, like what happened to Simona Halep. Because I think someone made a mistake in the sense that A, they weren't doing their job masking it, or B, they put the wrong stuff into her drink and it was all an accident, right? And I feel like a similar situation isn't far away from happening for someone in the top 20 because Simona Halep has a whole massive team beside her. So as much as I was like, no, if you got a big team and you got enough handlers around you, you're protected, you're safe. Who knows anymore, right? So I think it's a fair shout. I was of the assumption that the resources around you, if you're a more successful player, the harder it is to get caught. That's just how I would kind of break it down. This
is all Adderall's fault.
Yeah.
All that's the problem. All that ADHD medication that's being circulated among the top 100. Final three for you. The aforementioned Alexander Zverev will be cleared of all wrongdoing by the ATP the morning after a Grand Slam final. Take your pick of when that will be.
Yeah. Just on that point, Ben Rothenberg pointed this out this week. 458 days since the ATP announced the investigation was currently underway, and it's been 798 days since Olga Sharapova first made her accusation on Instagram and confirmed her story. So yeah, I think you're probably right, Simon. And it'll be, that or during a Grand Slam. Hell, they'll do it during a final. I could see that as well. That
was the thing. I was really trying hard to find like what is the deadest period? Or sorry, when's the time that no one cares about tennis when you could bury a story like this? And I figured like maybe Novak winning 22 or something, that would be a big one. They could just bury it the day afterwards. Yeah. Maybe
or Nadal
retiring. That could be good.
Sometime in February, I think would make sense.
Serena Williams comeback, and then mysteriously this news drops on the same day as that.
Yeah.
Okay, final two. And the first one, the PTPA folds.
Wow.
During the course of 2023.
So Vasher Pospisil was doing some media rounds after Canada won the Davis Cup in Toronto, and one of the hits, he was asked about the PTPA and what's going on really, and he made it sound like this was a huge year for them in terms of organization. And it sounded to me like it was a bit in the sense of make or break, or we have to really go all in this year and lay some foundations down. So in that vein, Simon, I think you're right. I think in the sense that we'll learn a lot about them very soon in terms of how well organized they really are and who they include.
Final one for me. Saudi Arabia will announce a tournament which will contain the biggest prize pool in tennis history.
Well, do you mean as in like a live golf situation where it's like a competing event or a tour, or it's a tour within the WTA and ATP, but it's just now a signature Saudi event?
Dev, I feel it in my bones. I feel it in my waters that one of these Gulf states is coming for a Grand Slam. I can feel it coming.
Doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it make a lot of sense, though, if you think about it? Making a new slam, even making a fifth slam to really dilute the waters.
Oh, come on, man. Strava is already the fifth slam.
It's true. That's a great one. No, I could definitely see that. I actually had a couple more, Simon, from our listeners. Quickly, Brian Rosenthal says the Saba double fault debacle could be over. Sabalenka will finish top 4 this season. I like that one a lot. I could definitely see it.
Absolutely. It's a good shout.
And then we got a few more, but I think they're more parting shots-esque, so I'll save them for after the break. We done? You're all predicted out?
I'm all predicted out. Everyone's had enough of my predictions anyway. Let's get to the good stuff in parting shots.
All right. When we come back to wrap up this week's show, it's parting shots, injuries, some sad news in terms of tennis and off the court, plus some marriage news coming up next on Open Era.
Welcome back to the Open Air Podcast. Devang, parting shots
Yes.
time. First one of the season. We're in 2023 and we have a bumper crop of stuff to get through. We mentioned it off the top. Charlie is dead. Long live the king. Carlos Alcaraz is out of the Australian Open. We touched on it a little bit, but I just wanted to ask you, does this give you slight concern? Just how the weirdness of what this injury was and how out of the blue it was?
A little bit. I mean, anytime someone this young is hampered by an injury of this severity, I think it's worth being concerned and hoping that this isn't something that maybe could shroud him for the majority of his career. Hopefully this is something that he can get sorted and behind him relatively quickly. But I do think that there's something to be said about this is a good sign in the sense that there's a lot of care around him, and in a lot of other situations you would worry that they may be rushing him back too quickly. I think Josh mentioned this on the Discord. I mentioned Josh a lot on this show because he's a genius and I love him and I love his comments on the Discord, but he was talking about like in other circumstances, you could see a case where they would rush him back and want him to play because it is a slam. It is following up the US Open. He is one of the hottest names in sport, let alone tennis. It's good for him to play, but no, they're like, we're going to play the long game here. He's got good people around him. So I'll choose to be optimistic about this, but anytime a 19-year-old suffers an injury like this, it's fair to be worried. And considering he played 7 million hours of tennis last year, you have to wonder how much of a knock-on effect that is as well.
Absolutely. From the sad news from Carlos Alcaraz to the similar sad news of Martina Navratilova, diagnosed during the course of this week with stage 1 throat cancer. It's obviously a very sad story. The multiple-time Grand Slam champion quoted as saying, "It's a double whammy. It's serious, but it's still fixable, and I'm hoping for a favorable outcome." She's going to fight for all that she's got. She's definitely a fighter, Dev. You don't win that many titles, be world number 1 and have the story that she has had and not be a fighter. We obviously wish all the best to her, but very sad news.
Hell of a fighter, one of the sport's greatest fighters, and she mentioned a double whammy. I think an unrelated form of breast cancer in its early stages was also detected during this discovery of the throat cancer. So awful news, but definitely wishing her all the best. And she seems positive about the upcoming fight, so we are sending her positive vibes as well.
Dev, breakpoint. We cannot escape it. It's coming. We are actually pretty close to the damn thing. The names,
we are.
Subject, everything got leaked, got released, whatever version of things you want to call it. It's out there in the open now. Were you surprised by any of the names that appeared on here? I think a lot of us were not shocked they chose to go to the route that they have done.
Not surprised at all. I do find like every Netflix show, I think, has the same naming convention for all their episodes. Like I feel like these are all repurposed from other shows as well. But like Maverick, you're like, yeah, I get it. Take the Crown, California Dreaming, blah, blah, blah. The subject's also not a big surprise, but fascinated to see how they do this. Like there's the French Open. I don't know how they're going to make, like, how can they make this uplifting or suspenseful when it's just Rafa destroying Ruud at the end, right? Like, how are they going to do this properly there? How much are they going to make Kyrgios look like the greatest gift to tennis, and how much we have to love him? And like the whole Tomljanovic against the world aspect as well, which I saw played up a bit. I don't know. I'm a bit skeptical. I know this isn't for me. And like I said, like, I think I came into the F1 series lapsed as a fan, and I found it as a really good way to catch up and familiarize myself with what was going on in the sport today. I don't know if this will do that for people who have fallen off the tennis roadmap bush. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you haven't watched in a few years and you watch this and you're like, okay, I kind of get a vibe of what's going on. You might, and you might get it in a good way, but I'm skeptical of that as well.
I listened to the New York Times podcast mailbag, year-end mailbag episode. There's 2 parts to it over the holiday period. And in it, they were talking about how difficult and how saturated the pop music industry has become, that it's just so hard. It's so diversified where everyone's got their own interests. And it's just really hard to find those big like flame moments where like everyone is all on the same thing. And I kind of just feel that's the same way in sport as well. Like I think John Garamonico, the host, was talking about it being like just tons and tons of smaller flames. Like that's just the way that it is that your cycle that you're in is just so short that something will make a small flame where everyone's like on it for a little bit and then it will just drop off immediately. Right. And it's just really, really hard to have these big tentpole moments. So I think this probably is the right format for the moment that we're in. Just a bunch of like cool water cooler moments for every couple of weeks, and then it drops off again. But I think tennis is kind of tailor-made for that. So I'm really excited to see how it does.
Yeah. I mean, Tomljanovic loses really early in Australian Open, right? Like, what the hell are they going to, like, what are they going to show in that episode with Berrettini? And like, how much is it tennis related? That I'm curious about. And I will watch, don't get me wrong, I will watch, but I wonder how annoyed I'll be because I'm a curmudgeon and this wasn't for me, and I'll be mad about it and go and complain about it online because that's the circle of life, right?
What they are going to cover is who gets Felix Auger-Aliassime in the divorce between Tomljanovic and Berrettini. That's really what we're all waiting for. Let's transition to some other stuff. In something that literally no one was asking for, the men's Olympic final got announced during the course of this week, but we played best of 5 sets in Paris.
Cool.
Cool. I mean,
why?
We're a tennis podcast. This is Parting Shots. I felt the need to put it in here, but let's move on swiftly, shall we?
I will. So the rest of the tournament is 3 sets, correct?
That's right. Yep.
So they're doing the weird old Masters Cup stuff.
Mm-hmm, that's right. Do you like that? Or did you like that?
Back then I did. Now I don't have no time for it at all. And I think this is ridiculous. Possibly because it's on clay. I'm already offended that this will be on clay as well. So yeah, it'll be gosh.
Gosh is probably the right way to leave that point. Andrei Rublev. Indeed so. You mentioned it. The new kit has been seen. A bunch of quotes about it. It seems like this was a play to, I mean, it's some sort of like, not corporate play, but some sort of like social good element to this, where a bunch of the money is trying to be funneled into positive channels. I didn't really like the kit, but I kind of like the idea behind it, in as so far as you can do anything when you're a sports athlete and having marketing deals like this. Did you have any thoughts on this one?
Couple things. We were talking about it in the Discord about Nike just basically being out on tennis, or like very close to just not being in tennis anymore. And I think moves like this kind of hammer that home to me, where I'm sure probably Rublev could have got somewhere else and gotten a decent deal. But I also wonder, the geopolitics around everything going on these days, and Rublev being a Russian athlete, how hard it might have been for him to get a deal of the magnitude he was looking for, Simon. So I think in that vein, like you said, I was kind of poking fun at him for the announcement because it was quite vague, but good on him. I think the kid is meh enough where you're like, all right, this does sound like a cryptocurrency kind of, but I'll back Rublev. I'll back Rublev on the dollar because I like Rublev in general.
I was trying to think of my own situation. If I had a kit sponsor, or like what the real, what's the absolute ultimate version of this that you can do that does social good? It's probably something like local, sustainably made inside of a labor-made factory, and a ton of the profits goes towards helping your local community or something like that. So not a giant, massive corporation, but something that's at least a bit closer to home to you. So maybe that, I don't know. God knows. Let's transition to Ons Jabeur, who made the cover of Vogue. This is one of the better covers we've seen, one of the better shoots I think we've seen in a while as well. How did you like this one? It was a little bit Game of Thrones in terms of how she was sitting, a little bit peacocky, but I really like this, and she's really a cool person, and it's great to see her in more of this stuff.
Big fan of it. I like the I like the racket peacock thing. I don't know. I was a sucker for it. I'm like, I chuckled. I liked it a lot. Did you also see that she joined Naomi Osaka's agency, Bush?
Ooh, I did not see that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So the roster is growing. It's Naomi Osaka, of course, part of Evolve, the sports management agency, but Nick Kyrgios is in that crew as well, amongst the other tennis players. I thought the Naomi put out a tweet about this, but the story she told about meeting Ons is really sweet. And I know this is all capitalism, etc., but cool for them. Kyrgios is also involved, so don't feel too good about it. But yeah.
Yes. So let's get to sets in the city. If you want to go to the personal flavor element to this, kind of.
Wait, before we do that, I do want to touch on a couple of things because this is going to be some on-court stuff. But from our listeners, CNC guy also said the United Cup is actually interesting. Tweak here, tweak there, but it's interesting. I think we agree, right? I think as much as we were laughing at the idea of another cup competition being shoehorned in here, overall, I want to see it return again, and I would like to see Canada involved next time.
I agree. I think that is a really good way of putting it as well. A couple of tweaks with it, but overall, the format was pretty damn cool, and I enjoyed it as an event.
And Lee Magella asked us, who is Quinton Hollis, and why has he flown so far under the radar? Quinton Hollis pushed Novak quite hard in Adelaide, played really, I think he was up 5-2 in the first set as well, but he's part of that lost generation for the French after the Musketeers, Simon, where all these guys are like 26, 25, 24, within the top 75, top 80, in a ton of draws. There's a lot of them, but I don't think there's one single player that stands out above the rest. So they kind of all are lumped in together.
He's not quite been a journeyman, has he? But at the point where he was only getting into first rounds of Grand Slams last year. I don't think he didn't even make it into all the main draws, did he? It was only the French onwards that he was inside of the world's top 90. So he was actually getting direct entry into it. But he's been a good stalwart at challenger level for a good length of time. And that's the thing, right? Like it's so difficult to find the accessibility for watching the Challenger Tour is not there, or maybe the interest is not there in general. But there's some really damn good players. I mean, we've seen it up close, right? Going to a bunch of these Challenger events and seeing how good the standard is. The line is very thin, and you have to have weapons to take you from a player who, is a very solid 120 in the world, 150 in the world to get inside of the top 70, inside of the top 80. That's what makes the margins in tennis so damn frustrating and also so damn interesting, is because just to rise 10 places in the rankings inside of the top 70, you've got to improve so wildly or have just an amazing run somewhere. He's a good player. He's a good player, but he's not an amazing player.
Right. Manarino, Rinderketch, Benjamin Bonsi, who lost in Pune in the final, Corentin Moutet, Quinton Hollis, Constantine Testine, Richard Gasquet, all of those guys, Simon, are within 40 to 70 in the rankings.
Wow.
That's like 8 guys. It's incredible. All right. That's
the rank
it.
and file. if you will.
The rank and file. Thanks to our listeners, of course, for sending those tweets in. They were great. Let's get to the set in the cities.
You said it with such pained expression, didn't you?
I was trying to remember what it was, and then as soon as it clicked in, a realization hit.
So Kai Nishikori finally had the marriage ceremony during the course of this week. I think it was actually last week, but he apparently was married in 2020, but didn't actually have a formal ceremony. Took to his Instagram, posted a very lovely photo. Does look a little grumpy, if you want to do yourself and do a little digging into it. Doesn't look entirely convinced by the whole thing, but in general.
He's like, why are we doing this 2 years after or 3 years after? Oh yeah, because of COVID. So we couldn't have a ceremony.
Come on, I've got to do a 17-hour training session after this. Dev, let's get to it. The elephant in the room.
No.
Ashley Barty is pregnant. This does hurt her chances of a comeback in 2023. Stranger things happen, of course. But,
it's true. Choosing to look on this to pause this. First of all, obviously, congrats to Ash Barty and her family. Good for her.
Tizza. My man.
You went for 6. Proper knock. So yeah, the predictions in a bit of a turmoil right now. We're in tough, but I've never been more confident that she will now have the spark to be pushed back by her young child to come back and win a slam at some point. So it might not be this year or next, but she'll be back on tour and winning a slam soon enough.
Is that child going to play cricket or tennis?
Oh, wow.
Or golf? I don't know.
I bet you Sporting Australia will be heavily involved in trying to lobby them, because that would probably be a super athlete either way.
My man, Tizza. Love him.
It's tough. Every time you say my man, it sickens me. More and more.
Oh dear. Okay. Also on the pregnancy train, also hurting the opportunity for making a comeback, Carla Suarez Navarro announced that she was pregnant during the course of the week. I mean, just 2 cool stories as well. Just to see, I mean, obviously 2 players at different stages of life, even though they're both retired, different ages, I guess. But just very cool to see that there is life outside of tennis. So super stoked to see that during the course of the week.
Excellent stuff. I also want to shout out Caroline Garcia, who went public with her battle that she had struggled with bulimia as she was looking to fill a void when things were not going her way on court. We talked about Caroline Garcia having just a ridiculous game, and last summer you got to see that on a week in and week out basis when she's at full flight. What a player to watch. But we mentioned the up and downs, and during those downs, things were just really tough for her in many ways. And I got a lot of courage and a lot of credit to her for talking about this publicly and opening up herself to more people in the aim of maybe helping them feel comfortable talking about how they are affected by this as well. So a major shout out to Caroline Garcia for making that leap.
Absolutely, Dev. It's one of those subjects that is really kind of challenging for a lot of people to talk about. It's not one of those things that is first of mind. So I'm hugely like with all of these. Anytime these athletes actually talk out about things that are really, really important, I think we can all be grateful for that, because it genuinely does help people. These kind of words do genuinely find similar people who find themselves in the same position, and I think that's always to be applauded, because it takes incredible bravery to do that when something is not so out in the open like that. So absolutely massive love and affection goes out to Caroline Garcia for doing that. Dev, can we close the show with something that's a little more on a cheery note?
Yes, please.
Carlos Alcaraz was seen during the course of this week getting his first tattoo, CCC. C as in the letter C, not SI as in C in Spanish. It stands for Cabeza, Corazón y Cojones. Or if I want to do this in Spanish, Cabeza, Corazón y Cojones. Sorry, I was just in Barcelona a few weeks ago, so I couldn't resist it.
Yeah.
Stands for Head, Heart and Balls, Triple C, as he's now known.
Wow.
What would be your own motto to have tattooed onto your body that would encourage you when times are tough on the tennis court?
Is it tacky if I take Stan Wawrinka's tattoo and just plaster it on my own body?
That's such a good
Look what
one,
it did
isn't
for Stan. Look what it did for Stan, man. If I can get just a small dosage of that, I'll take it.
Would you have it written in Elvish? That's the real question.
Of course. Of course. Oh, I'm a bit stunned you had to ask me that, but obviously.
Dear.
What about you?
I mean, it's a really good one as well. I was actually going to go in that direction. I don't have any tattoos to start with. I've never really felt the desire to do that. I think I was either born too late for it or too early for it. Like, I think we missed the generation that was really into it. So I don't know. I kind of like the head, heart, balls one. It's kind of little cheeky. And I think it shows a little more personality with Carlito than he's had the chance to show off so far.
It does. It does.
2 challenges remaining, Dev, as we close the first show of 2023. 2023, Jesus Christ. It's ridiculous to believe that we're in 2023. Anyway, do you have anything that you wanted to bring up that's non-tennis related in the first 2 challenges remaining of the year?
Just a funny little anecdote, not an anecdote, but just a realization about getting older. And I'm working, I started on a new job a few months ago, but I think I'm probably one of the older colleagues on my team in terms of day-to-day stuff. So we're talking a lot electronically through your various messaging systems throughout the workday, and just beginning to realize, Bush, a lot of my references or the things that I knew or grew up with, they're not the same as the younger generation. And sometimes I sound like a crazy person because I'm making references that no one has any idea what I'm talking about. So what's happening to other people is happening now to me. And it's shocking, saddening, upsetting, but also the circle of life. So we go forward.
Did you have a particular event which happened, which
I think it was Eric Lindros. You used to call him the Big E, right? The Big E, Eric Lindros.
Why are you asking me? I didn't grow up in Canada. I barely know who he is.
You know what I'm saying, right? Nudging you across the ocean. In any case, basically that's what happened, Simon, in which no one knew what I was talking about. And I was like, oh my God, I thought everyone knew who the Big E was. So yeah, that was the moment for me.
It's the moment that we invite a guest onto this show and start talking about how much we love Roger Federer, and the person will say, who is Roger Federer?
Exactly.
Who is this guy?
We pack it up.
The Uniqlo president? Is that who it is?
Exactly. The Swiss ambassador to Japan? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
The tournament director at Wimbledon? Why are you bringing him up here?
All right. What's yours, sir? What's yours?
I took some time over the holiday period to listen to every single one of the tracks on the NPR Top 100 songs throughout the course of 2022. It took me an entire afternoon. I wanted to try and broaden my horizons to see what music I'd missed, and also to listen to some absolutely batshit insane stuff. I don't really recommend this as a task, unless you really do have the time to do it and really want to listen to some stuff from all over the world. But it did remind me that getting the chance to listen to music outside of your own comfort zone and stuff that follows patterns from all over the world is kind of fun, just to see where, like, what crossovers and what kind of music is making it big in certain parts of the world. And it was a reminder, just like, there's some great stuff out there. And some of the stuff that I was introduced to during the course of the year, I didn't have the chance to revisit and circle back to, but I really, really enjoyed listening to some of the Afrobeat stuff that was on there. It's such a cool genre, and I just wanted to shout out Fireball DML. Amazing. Bandana. It's a great song. Everyone should listen to it.
Incredible shout out. And yes, go listen to that. I'm going to do that myself. And we'll close there, Simon, for the first show of 2023. Great to be back with you this month as we are knee deep in tennis down under all the time. If you like the show and you like what you're hearing, please give us a rating or a review wherever you find your podcast. That would be incredible as we try and get this pod into more people's ears this month. We're also, of course, on Discord at patreon.com/open era. You join us there. You get the show ad free. You get it early on Sundays. Plus, you get to talk tennis all the time with us on our Discord for a couple bucks a month. Helps us keep making the show. Plus, we've got a great tennis community that I think could use more members, and the more the merrier. So join us over there. We're also on Twitter at Open Era Pod. where we're tweeting about tennis all the time. For producer Greg on the ones and twos, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.